Hello, welcome to the Yale Women webinar, Ageism at Work, Breaking the Universal Barrier We All Face. My name is Ursula Burton, class of 1988, and I am a governing member of the Yale Women Council. These webinars that Yale Women produces are for you. We want them to reflect our membership in all of its diversity. So if you are interested in something in particular, please let us know and help connect us to speakers you want to hear from. Case in point, after our last webinar on career transitions, many of you wrote in requesting a webinar on ageism in the workplace. So here, by popular demand, is that webinar coming to you live from New York, the Yale campus in New Haven, and Los Angeles, where we are very aware of age discrimination. Youth is prized here in the workplace, and as a result, fewer older people are behind the camera, and therefore there's an underrepresentation of older people on screen. There have been many studies showing that children, medical doctors, and even older people themselves are affected by what they see on screen, and that affects how they even see their own lives. I'll let our moderator, Amy Armitage, introduce our amazing speakers, but first let me tell you just a little bit about her. A graduate of Yale SOM, Amy is CEO and founder of the Nexus Peer Group. Of Nexus Peer Groups. Previously, she was Managing Director of Research Programs for the Institute for Corporate Productivity, and before that, she was a journalist in Washington, D.C., focusing on water policy. She is currently a member of the Yale Women Council. Amy, welcome. Thank you for being with us today, and I'm going to turn things over to you.
Very good. Hello, and thank you, Ursula. I'm Amy Armitage, Yale School of Management class of 1985. And a member of the Governing Council of Yale Women. I'd like to welcome you all to our session today on ageism at work, a topic that speaks to all ages. Ageism is a universal topic because aging is inevitable, but ageism, which is about discrimination and stereotyping at any age, is not inevitable. With that in mind, our goals are threefold today. Challenge your thinking about what ageism is, who it affects, and bust a few myths in the process. Provide practical ways to deal with ageism at work and in your own life planning, including how to address unconscious bias. And third, help you build a more optimistic and empowering view of aging, work, and purposeful lives. We chose a panel of women today who have diverse and deep expertise on the topic. I'm going to briefly introduce each of the speakers before they speak. They'll share their views, then we'll shift to the question and answer time for the last 20 minutes or so. Several of you sent in questions beforehand. Thank you. We'll get to a few of those. But I'd also like you to send in your questions through the chat box. We can see it here, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. We also know we can't cover all of the topics today that you might be interested in. So please provide those additional interests in the chat box to help us identify future programming. Our panelists today include Ashton Applewhite, author of This Chair Rocks, a manifesto against ageism and popular TED Talk speaker and blogger. Diane T. Ashley, 76, Yale BA, who sits next to me here, former Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and Leslie Fairstein, Executive Director of Amazing Community, which provides community forums and online resources for women over 50. So we'll let the conversation begin. Beginning with Ashton, I'm going to begin with you. Ashton Applewhite is the author of the critically acclaimed This Chair Rocks, a manifesto against ageism. She's been recognized by PBS, the New York Times, the New Yorker, National Public Radio, and the American Society on Ageism as an expert on this topic. She blogs at This Chair Rocks, has written for Harper's, The Guardian, the New York Times, and is the voice of Yo, Is This Ageist? Ashton speaks widely at ventures that have ranged from universities and community centers to the TED stage and the United Nations. I'm going to ask her, though, to begin by framing the topic. Ashton, you describe in your book the jolt of fresh air when you first started researching the discrepancy of what you imagined about ageism and the reality. You say, we're ageist when we feel or behave differently toward a person or group on the basis of how old we think they are. Can you tell us a little bit more about your broader understanding of ageism and why is it so important now?
Delighted to. And I think I'll start at the broadest possible level, which is really the global context. More of us are living larger than ever before in history. And in the Paleolithic era, the emergence of a third generation is what enabled human civilization to flourish. That's when art and music started to happen. And in the last century, we have seen a 4 and even 5 living generations become commonplace. And that is another tectonic shift. It's happening at a time of profound uncertainty and anxiety. I think everyone knows that. Political leaders are already exploiting deep divisions of race and class and gender, and we cannot afford to add age to the list, right? That's how high the stakes are, really. And we have a fantastic alternative, which is intergenerational solidarity, coming together at all ages to tackle these wicked problems. It's obviously going to take all hands on deck, and to build a more equitable future. And this is only going to happen if we challenge ageism, right? If we challenge the structures and the systems that benefit from age bias and intergenerational conflict. Let me give you a very local example. Look at how much discourse in the current presidential race is about getting rid of old people, right? Or old versus young. Think about Pete Buttigieg's call for generational change. Sounds innocuous because we're not used to hearing ageist stuff. That is frankly dog whistle language around aging. Would he say, let's get rid of all the straight people, or let's get rid of all the women? He's saying, let's get rid of all the old people. And that is not okay. Biden is a dinosaur, in my opinion, not because of how old he is, but because his ideas are trapped in the past. So if we want to get rid of ageism in the workplace or anywhere else, we need a grassroots movement to raise awareness of ageism. The best analogy is the women's movement. Think where we would be, would any of us be on this call without the women's movement and what it did to change the roles and positions of women around the world. And think about how sexism, structural discrimination, was central to any discussion of women's rights. So that's how central ageism needs to be, no matter where we're talking about it occurring, in healthcare, between our ears, first and foremost, right? Or in the workplace. You mentioned that ageism affects all ages. Aging is not just something annoying that old people and parents do. We're aging from the minute we're born. So young people experience a lot of it too. Remember how hard it was to be 20? I think we look back and romanticize it. But one reason this is true is because of this drumbeat of impending loss and scarcity. And needless to say, women face ageism earlier and much louder. This drumbeat, this crazy idea that 2/3 of life is decline, which we know, I think, as older women, is not the case. So that's what I mean when I say ageism casts a shadow across our whole lives. And if any woman on this call really thinks that she is a lesser version of the woman she used to be, less valuable, less fun in bed, less interesting, then that woman, I urge you to think about where those messages come from and what purpose they serve. And I will talk later on about what we can do to silence those voices and come up with a better narrative.
That's great. Thank you, Ashton. I think it's a great framing of the issue to really understand that ageism is an issue that we all have to address. I'm going to, and we'll circle back to you a little later on for some more myth busting and practical advice. But next I'm going to introduce Leslie Fairstein, who's the Executive Director of Amazing Community. Leslie has over 40 years of experience in the nonprofit sector, including healthcare, behavioral healthcare, arts and healthcare, volunteerism. She's created, implemented, and successfully managed programs in both healthcare and educational settings. She served as a mentor and supervisor to dozens of psychotherapists, in-house staff, and volunteers, and continues with her own psychotherapy practice. Leslie, while ageism is a broad social issue, the Amazing Community, of which I am a proud member, is addressing a specific community need of women over 40 that Yale Women thought it critical to address. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about why you and others like Stella Lupashore, who founded the AC, what was the need you were addressing and what specific work are you doing there?
Well, thank you, Amy. Thank you. It's wonderful being here. Stella founded Amazing Community in 2018 when she realized that half of the unemployed in the United States were women between the ages of 55 and 65. Now, that statistic I always laugh at because it didn't mean at 65 some of us found work and got a job, but that's where the statistics are. We sort of fall off in our invisibility. She was thinking about, as she saw 50 down the track for her, what could she do to help these women get back into the workforce, particularly if they've had a gap in work, so that if they took time off to raise a family or to take care of elderly parents, or they themselves had an illness, how could we help them? How could she help them get back into work and understand what the workplace looked like now from when they last left it? I was out of work at the time. I was doing research and lecturing on women aging and body image because my background in mental health is in eating disorders. And I was talking to a mutual friend, and she said, you should meet my friend Stella, because she's kind of noodling around with this idea of older women as well. So Stella and I met for coffee, and it sounded like probably a nonprofit made sense for her to start building something up for women. And within 30 minutes, she said to me, well, could you be the executive director? Which kind of blew my mind, because for 2 years, I couldn't even get an interview. And in 30 minutes, I was offered an executive director position. So I said, yep, I could. And our partnership was secured. And so we got the organization, it's 501c3, and started building amazing community. One of the first things we decided to do when we were only about 6 months old was to put on a 2-day conference. We think big. So we decided to do a conference called Inclusion by Design 2018, which we did last year at PwC. And we really launched our whole mission. Our mission is to expand the work horizon for women who are 50 plus. And we were able to do that in a 2-day conference. Our focus is on women and helping them reskill, upskill, get ready for the current and the future of work. We also want to work with companies and organizations to understand the value of hiring women over 50 and what we bring to the workforce. And we also are working on technology. We want to teach hybrid skills, both technical and social, and teach the technology that we now need when we get into the workforce. So at Inclusion by Design 2018, we had a day of workshops for the women to do some hands-on work with design thinking, visual sense making. And then we had a second day of panelists and speakers talking about what we bring to the workplace. We targeted HR managers, talent managers, recruiters, so that they could really hear and understand what we do bring, what we offer. That was a huge success, considering, not even considering, it was a huge success. We just put this on in just a couple of months. On April 2nd, we did a half-day conference on Equal Pay Day, which was on Equal Pay Day, which was also a terrific session, kind of depressing because it's not happening right away, parity for women. But it was certainly interesting and well received. And now we're working on Inclusion by Design 2019, Women Over 50 Claiming Our Place in the Future of Work. It's going to be in New York City, October 29th and 30th, and also back at PwC. They've been very generous in donating the space to us. And we're going to be focusing again on upskilling and workshops on day one for women. Things like demystifying the digital world, getting your mojo back and your confidence. I'm going to be doing that one. And accessibility, I can certainly talk about that. And accessibility and inclusion. And these will be workshops that women will be able to do hands-on practice with. The second day, we have, again, targeting professionals who are managers, hiring, and we have Ruth Finkelstein from the Brookdale Center for Aging as our keynote speaker. And we're going to have workshops for the women on day one. I'm sorry, I just told you that. On day two, we're having panelists talking about the intergenerational workforce, which is, that Ashton was just saying, is critical, and new tools and new ways of learning, and other speakers. what we also been doing, what Amy alluded to, is we run workshops. I'm running workshops all year long, and things like introduction to coding. Do you want to become an entrepreneur? Business model you, where some of the women could learn how to do design thinking. And now we're doing our first webinar, July 17th, on finding your purpose, fostering your passion. And that will be a daytime webinar that we'll be hosting. We're going to see how that works out. I think we can target a lot more people. They'll be able to hear what we're up to. My own story, as you said, I spent my career in nonprofit administration in all sorts of different areas. And I always worked. I never had trouble getting a job. I quit one job, I was recruited or found another. And then I found myself at 66, unable to even get an interview. And it really took me a minute to realize that it had to do with my age. It shocked me. I never, because from this side, we don't feel so old. But from my resume, I was old. And it was really incredibly difficult. It was a difficult 2 years until I met Stella. I know that first year I read over 50 novels because that was about the best thing I could do. But at this point, I'll be 69 in just a couple of weeks. I feel like I'm a poster child for Amazing Community because I certainly have not had, I'm definitely a digital immigrant and have had to learn a lot of new technology. And I understand how challenging and frustrating it can be. My own personal nemesis has been Google Docs. Now I'm learning Slack. We've decided to go to Slack, so I'm taking a tutorial in that. But I did learn how to do things that I never in my life thought I could do, like code. I took the Introduction to Coding class, and I was able to build a web page. We had a wonderful teacher, and using his code, I could completely make a web page. It blew my mind. And it wasn't scary or mysterious. It was actually really fun. And last summer, a 20-year-old intern that we had and I sat down and we built a very basic chat bot. And I don't even think I really understood what a chat bot was, let alone having the ability to build it. So that I know how our women, when they come to us having been out of work, how they feel. And I can let them know that, and go along with them, that this really, we can learn a lot, no matter what age we're in. So I really think that we at Amazing Community are co-creating a whole new way of working and working together. And it was interesting, the other day, I was talking to a friend of mine and she quoted someone who said to her recently, "Stop trying to hold on to a life that you've outgrown." And I think in some way that's our motto. We still are holding on to things and fears that we had before we got back into the workforce. And I think it's time to build a whole new world, new mojo for ourselves. So that's what we're up to.
Leslie, that's great. I think that's a wonderful idea to move forward with, this idea that we're always learning and building our new sense of ourselves. Just in looking forward, as we all should be doing right now, where do you think you'll have the most future impact with your career and this organization?
My own personal impact? Well, I think my impact is that I can really understand and help women who are coming back into the workforce.
Yeah.
I think the impact that Amazing Community can have is both with women, helping them to upskill and get back into the workforce, or pivot to a new job, or become an entrepreneur if that's what they want. And I think that in the future, I really hope that our biggest impact is changing the ways that companies and organizations, hire older women and understand that we are a valuable part of the workforce.
Excellent. And we'll be sending out follow-up information for those of you who want information about the session in the fall, as well as the upcoming webinar. So you'll get that contact information sent out. But thank you very much, Leslie. Very inspiring. I'd now like to introduce my co-panelist here, Diane Ashley. Diane, when I looked at your profile, I really thought you're the modern day Renaissance woman. You recently retired as the Chief Diversity Officer at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York and have had a demonstrated history of working in the financial services industry as an SVP at Citigroup. You're responsible for Dodd-Frank mandated reports to Congress on D&I over the last 8 years. You're the board chair for 10 years of an accredited academic institution and a leader on 5 other nonprofit boards. Your educational background includes a JD from Rutgers School of Law, Boston University Masters of Education, Yale University degree in French with study at the Sorbonne in Paris about theater and culture. And I asked you to participate in this panel to give us a broader view as well about ageism, diversity, and unconscious bias. As a practitioner and former Chief Diversity Officer, you've been actively involved in this issue. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your journey and about the need for diversity and about unconscious bias.
So thank you very much, Amy, and welcome everyone on the phone or who's tuning in. I would certainly say that, you know, I have to laugh here. Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. I feel like I'm being dated a little bit with that, but you know, the issue for me has been one of always really trying to stretch and also thinking about how can we make an impact in this particular society. So I would say certainly the work that I had in my original career pathing was to work in the U.S. Foreign Service. And that's what led to my opportunity to go to the Sorbonne because I wanted to see what it was like to live abroad. Although at the end of the year, how can you have a bad time when you're 19 living in Paris? I realized though that I did not want to live abroad for 30 years working for the Foreign Service. So I came back. And I must say, I kind of found my way to diversity and inclusion because in some respects, it replicates what a diplomat does. And so I have spent the last 12 years working at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. And I have to tell you, one of the things that's been very exciting for me during that period of time has been an opportunity to see cultures in transition. I had the opportunity to start in 2007 when Tim Geithner was president of New York Fed. Remember those days? Lived through the crisis and had an opportunity to see it from the inside out. And that really was compelling because I got to see what happens with organizations when they're under crisis themselves. So that actually is one of the guiding principles that has helped me in thinking through this whole notion of education, why it's so important. Our role at the New York Fed was actually to start up the first Office of Diversity and Inclusion. And what we wanted to do is to educate our staff on what it means to work with people from different backgrounds. We found out obviously through the work of Dr. Mahzarin Banaji, who was from Harvard, and she heads a group called the Harvard Project Implicit Bias, that the whole notion of unconscious bias is driven by part of your brain development for humans. And so what happens is when you are growing up, your brain is developing and it's really pulling together ways to think about fight or flight. That's the development that leads to what becomes your unconscious bias. Everyone, let me start by saying, everyone has biases. We all do. And the issue is as you're growing up, those biases help you in terms of framing how you grew up, the generation you grew up with, perhaps the background you grow up with, the gender that you grow up with, and it helps to shape your perception of the world. But when you get into the workplace, sometimes we find that some of those biases, while they may have been helping as we grew up, when we get into a workplace that is as diverse as the workplace that we serve today, with so many diversity dimensions, you hear people talk about intersectionality, which simply means that people are no longer one-dimensional. You're not just simply a woman or an LGBT person or a male or old. Oftentimes you come to the table and you're 4 or 5 and 6 buckets, right? You're a multidimensional person. So in that workplace that's complex, you need to understand what can I do that will help to understand, to frame and reference how we can work together. This is where implicit bias really is helpful. So one of the things that we did early on is to start to educate people about implicit bias and understand what causes it and how it's framed. An initiative that we started at the bank, Amy, was simply to start to have after we had our initial education, where we had actually Dr. Banaji come to the bank and speak to all of our executives and our managers, is to have our hiring managers really refer back to her implicit association test before they went on to a search. Why do that? If you're not familiar with it, it is a free service. You can look at it on the website, but they measure things, interestingly enough, not just simply in the five categories most people think about. They have an IAT on skin tone, on weight, on religion, on sexuality. And what the test basically does, it's free, is they pair two pictures together, and what the test is doing, there is an algorithm built in to see how long it's taking you to react to one more favorably than another. It's been done, millions and millions of times. There's no way you can game it, but we all find out at the end of the day that we all have biases, and then how do we work against them? That's one thing that I think really is very, very helpful to be aware of. Now, the second thing that we wanted to talk about a little bit is how does it operate? It creates and reinforces stereotyping. You hear stereotyping, we've all dealt with it in our whole lives. And there is a researcher by the name of Susan Fiske, and she talks about stereotypes for older people that are often based on how younger people expect older people to behave. 3 examples of what she calls contributing to ageism. One is succession stereotyping. Younger people believe that older individuals have had their turn and should make way for them to move ahead. I don't know how many of you have probably experienced this. Perhaps if you have your own children, you might have heard some of that conversation. Consumption stereotyping. Younger people that have limited resources in our society now think that those resources should be allocated toward them versus the older population. And identity stereotyping, where younger people feel that older people should act their age and not try to replicate and imitate them in dress, customs, etc. Now, I don't know if I agree with that so much, but I would certainly say that I can see there is a role for that. Maybe we don't all need to wear some of the outfits that they wear. They wouldn't look good at this age anyway. But those are some of the things that really contribute to ageism. But all of these factors foster wrong assumptions. And what they do in the aggregate is that they hinder progress because of resistance to change. So, one of the questions you asked me to talk about is how to deal with bias caused by ageism. And these are some suggestions for people that are still in the workplace. Rethinkability, that's the first thing. And I think, Ashton, you touched on it a little bit. We no longer live in an age where prowess counts. Are we working? Leslie, talk about it. Are you current on the technology that's required for today's workforce? Are you taking those extra courses? Are you learning Slack, for example? Have you established a circle of contexts that represent different ages and other diversity dimensions where you can exchange ideas? For example, are you not only talking to people your age who started with you in the company, but people that are younger, people that are older? And are you also recognizing your organization as a mentor? Because mentoring, Fast Company had a very interesting study done with what they call reverse mentoring, where the younger person mentored the older person, and yet both groups learned. Unlike in the distant past, do you have an active role in managing your own career? I will say certainly at our bank, when I first got there, they were told that let us, the bank, manage your career for you. That is a thing of the past. Now, are you actively managing your own career? Are you setting up the appointments? Are you taking the training? You're engaging in the difficult conversations. Fourth, are you bringing your authentic self to work? Perhaps you're hearing a lot about that. Bringing your authentic self to work simply means bringing who you are. If there is a scenario where you're acting one way and you're saying something differently, that creates real issues of disconnect, and particularly with young people who are looking to see, like, how are you going to act under pressure? How are you reacting to change, etc. So these are ways that you can help to combat ageism. So, of course, I'll put my lawyer hat on. If in fact there is distinct discrimination, I would certainly be the first person to tell you, please reach out to your HR, your EEO, your legal people, or your ombuds members. Certainly it makes a lot of sense because you shouldn't have to endure that, and we all have rights. But I think more importantly today, one of the things I want to bring up, and it's been touched on earlier, is having a plan of action that can serve as a bridge for change. And that brings me to why I recommend it's an exciting, practical, and timely resource for those who are tuning in. Kathy Allen, Nancy Berg, Jay Smith, and the late, unfortunately, Rita Foley, all are boomers, and they have been conducting dozens of interviews with our generation to review and come up with strategies for the phenomenon of how we think about our next chapter. They call themselves the Reboot Partners, and they offer retreats. They have books that are based upon their seminal book, which was called Reboot Your Life, Energize Your Career and Life by Taking a Break. I recently returned from one of their retreats in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And I will say to you, I think anybody who is contemplating a change in their life, be it a transition or anticipating retirement, might want to think about either reaching out to the books or certainly signing up for one of their workshops. Because what it's going to do, it's going to give you an in-depth, practical series of understanding and tips to guide you thinking through the transition. So the first thing, let's talk about it. You need to think about setting a plan to anticipate change. And if you can do that, that will help you bring peace of mind, help you move seamlessly into your next chapter. And what are some of the things that reboot scenarios are talking about? Let's just talk about a few of them. Workplace. You leave your work for another job. That's a workplace scenario, and what are you going to do about it? Between gigs, you hand in your notice. You're so burned out, you don't know what to do. You want to take some time off before you get started again. How to get yourself on track. Unexpected. Well, you lose your job. Your department is downsized. You have sickness or sickness of a family or friend or death. These are unexpected situations. If you're looking for a way to proactively think about how can I anticipate this, because we are all going to undergo change, I would recommend that you consider the recommendations of the Reboot Partners. They offer 4 phases of this transitionary state, which we're all going to move into. In fact, I'm a person that believes that we should celebrate our age. You create space, putting your life in order. Reconnect with the people. We've been so busy working. One of the things I'm doing now as a recent retiree is calling it classmates from Yale that I haven't talked to in years. Maybe you also have friends and colleagues that you have stayed out of touch with because you've been working on the grind for 24/7 for the last several decades. Exploration by learning new things and reconnecting with your passion. Did you always want to paint? Did you always want to have music? Did you always want to garden? These are things you may not have had an opportunity to do. And part of what will happen if you really pay attention in the transition, you will re-engage your left and right brain because we've been working so much on one side versus the other. Finally, re-entry, which will get you into your chapter of your new life. You know, at the end of this, I like to tell people, Amy, that I am not retiring. I tell them I am rewiring. So I would certainly say from a revolutionary perspective, I think it makes a lot of sense. And, you know, I certainly would encourage anybody who's going through a transition to think about taking the opportunity to stop, breathe, take a break, and begin to dream again.
Oh, I love it. I don't think we can have any better recommendations than that for what's next. Rewiring and dream. Okay, as promised, I'm going to now move the conversation back to Ashton. We seem to be busting a lot of myths today about this topic, who it impacts and what to do about it. Wonder if you'd tell us a little bit more about why you think this topic is really ripe for discussion and social change, and what are some of the practical strategies that we can do ourselves, just as Diane mentioned, in order to address this issue?
Happy to. I feel like I should say, let you all know that if you had told me 10 years ago that I would be fascinated by aging, I would have said, why do I want to spend my time thinking about something so yucky and depressing? And it is anything but. It is, you know, it is the biggest story there is. It's how we move through life, interact with each other and institutions. But man, was I skeptical starting out. I started writing about aging because I was afraid of getting old. It was about 12 years ago. I was in my mid-50s. And the catalyst for this whole project was learning in about 30 seconds of research at the very top of the internet how much of what I thought I knew about late life was way off base or flat out wrong. Just a couple of examples. I thought the odds of ending up in a nursing home were pretty good. At the time, the percentage of Americans over 65 in nursing homes was 4%. It's down to 2.5% in a decade. I learned about the U-curve of happiness that shows that people are happiest at the beginnings and the ends of their lives. I thought, well, that must be true if you're wealthy. That must be true if you're healthy. It's true across cultures and across marital status and socioeconomic status. It's a function of the way aging itself affects the brain. I was terrified of Alzheimer's. No one knows that Alzheimer's rates are declining fast. Sometimes I say I'm in the both sides of the business story. It's not that our fears about aging aren't legitimate and real. It's that we never hear the other side of the story, right? Our fears are so out of proportion. And that anxiety is bad for us. There's really interesting research about the link between attitudes towards aging and cognitive function. One study out of Yale, Becca Levy's fantastic work there, shows that people with more positive, which means more realistic attitudes towards aging, are less likely to get Alzheimer's, even if they have the gene that predisposes them to the disease. So that alone is a reason why ageism is important. When it comes to the workplace, not a single stereotype about older workers holds up under scrutiny. Less productive, less creative, less dependable. The most effective workforces obviously are mixed age for reasons, that we don't have time to go into, but they're intuitively obvious. Just like if we have people from different countries or of different sexual orientations, we come up with better, richer solutions. So some things you could do to call that out or to raise awareness of it at work are, if everyone in the room or on a team is the same age, unless there's a really good reason, call it out, right? I mean, I've gotten used to noticing these things, especially around race, but a lot of people, don't, or they don't think about age because it hasn't bleeped onto our radar, and that's the thing. We need to become aware of bias, as you point out with the unconscious bias stuff, in order to challenge it. Ask people what they think of as criteria for diversity. Most people don't say age. But when you say, how about age? No one says that's a stupid idea. And if people make an ageist comment, oh, are you still working, right? Or when are you going to retire? Just say, why would you ask that? And let that awkward silence hang there for a minute. Or why would you think that, right? Because it's not okay. It's ageist. This is, of course, it's great to be talking to a room full of women, although maybe there's some men lurking, because shocker, women face more age discrimination in the workplace, far more. It kicks in younger. Employers, stop investing in women's careers a decade earlier than men's. We stop being promoted to managerial positions at age 34, the data shows, because we might be thinking about having children or have children, and we all know your uterus and your brain can't function at the same time. And then, of course, it gets harsher as we age because we are judged more critically for our appearances. Economists have a charming name for this, the attractiveness penalty. Women are never the right age, and we pay for it professionally, economically, and socially. Why has the gender wage gap barely budged in all these decades, as Leslie referred to it? Because we live under patriarchy and because it boosts corporate profits, right? That is how the status quo benefits from sexism, by discounting women's work, especially the work done by women of color, especially by undocumented immigrants, right? So all these injustices are compounded by race and by class. That's intersectionality, as I'm sure most of you know. Capitalism benefits from ageism because it makes it easy for companies to exploit workers at both ends of the age spectrum, right? Younger and older workers too. We're all in this together. The same macroeconomic, trends that are making it harder for older workers to get rehired, especially women, are making it tough for millennials to get a foothold, right? So we need to think in terms of large-scale sustainable solutions that deal with the whole, that do what we can to enhance our employment prospects and security across the entire lifespan. So here's a really big ask, because that's kind of what I'm here for. Do we want to maintain power structures that privilege the white and the male and the wealthy by continuing to compete to stay young? Right? That's the dominant mode. We rate each other by age. We all do this. No judgment. Everyone is ageist. It's really hard to get these thoughts out of our head. Or do we want to subvert them because we didn't write these rules and they are not good for us? We have an opportunity, and it is a huge ask, but I think it's necessary to keep colluding in our own disempowerment, to keep cooperating on these bad terms, right? To dig the hole deeper. Or we can subvert them, right? By drawing on what we know and by coming together. Because the way it is coming together at all ages, because the way it is now, each generation, our daughters, friends, the young women we love, have to learn for themselves just how dumb and futile it is to fear getting older and how much of our youth we squander on worrying about it. So, you know, and we all know, I mean, I often say, you know, no matter how unwoke anyone is about ageism, I've never met anyone who actually wants to be any younger. You know, people's eyes light up and then they go, oh, wait, because no, you don't get to just swap out the battered bits. You have to throw away, you know, you have to go back to where you were and erase it. And we know that our years are what make us us. Many older women say that late life is the best time of all. We come into our power. I see you nodding. You know, it's a time of confidence and authenticity. So how do we make this happen? The tool that catalyzed the women's movement is consciousness raising. What happened is that women came together and shared notes and realized that what they had been thinking of as personal problems, getting harassed, not getting hired, getting patted on the butt, were not personal problems. They were widely shared political problems that required collective action. And there's a process for that realization that I love because it speaks to the activist in me and the nerd in me. And I have a hunch that a lot of you listening share those two characteristics. Collective liberation, right? That we can become, you know, first thinking we're just stuck with this is the way it is, to realizing, wait, it's a collective problem and that we can come together and do something about it. We're only going to do that with a mass movement like the women's movement. Cognitive liberation is a fantastic feeling. It is the linchpin of movement building. I urge you to, on my website, and I'll post it, is a free downloadable consciousness raising guide called Who Me, Ageist, because the first step is looking at our own bias. We can't challenge bias unless we're aware of it. I promise that's the most uncomfortable part, because once you see it in yourself, you start to see it in the world, and that's really liberating. I am looking, hint, hint, for a smart feminist, which I would love to be a woman of color, because I don't want this to repeat the mistakes of second wave feminism, this movement, and ignore the issues faced by women of color and leave those at the margins out. I don't know if you're following all the stuff around Pride, but there's a lot of critique of the gay rights, mainstream gay rights movement for making the same mistake, you know, privileging those with more and leaving the issues of those with the margins out. So let's think about that. I'm looking for some smart feminist to help me, or do it herself, better yet, adapt the guide to be a guide for women only. But if all you do is think about your own attitudes towards age and aging, or how you use the words old and young, you know, even if that's a big if, and that's how we change the culture. So I hope you'll join the movement in whatever way and at whatever scale feels right to you.
Very good. Well, thank you very much, Ashton. And we're going to turn to our Q&A right now. And I actually just want to remind people to put it in the chat box versus the Q&A section. And I love a comment that just came in from Esther. Why are we talking about aging and getting older when we could focus on getting wiser and more experienced? And I think that's a wonderful thought to kind of close some of our session with. But one of the questions that came in that I'd like one of our panelists to address is, can the panel provide some advice on overcoming bias in youth-oriented fields like the arts or technology, where decision makers and media often fixate on discovering the next emerging talent rather than someone who's been working at it for a few decades? And this person said, I love this comment too, is also a lot of us being Yaleys lived that other side for a while. We were the precocious young people, which made us special at the time, at least for a while. Diane, I know you worked in financial services, and where we've discussed there's quite a bit of age bias. Could you address that issue?
Well, I think the issue is, one, focusing on who you are, again, being your authentic self. This is particularly prevalent, for example, in people that work in the television industry and maybe working in investment banking. And I think there's really no way to hide who you are. So I think what you need to do is just be your best person. I think you need to be fresh in terms of the ideas. I think you need to listen. I think you really need to spend some time building relationships with younger people. Understand that, you know, for them, relationships are key. You have to change perhaps some of your thought about how you approach them. They are much more aligned in working with the collective than the individualism that we experienced growing up. And I think, honestly speaking, you know, I think about there's a whole movement right now in the field of modeling, where you perhaps have started to see where you have beautiful women who are models who are in their 70s, who are proud to show up their gray hair, their silver hair. And I think actually one of the things that I think that you can think about is using who you are to make you unique and distinctive. So I would certainly argue, don't try to be younger than the younger people that are there. Be who you are and contribute your perspective, because that's part of what will make your business work. You need the collective group of cognitive diversity, which are the varying perspectives, for you to be able to be a person who will be able to contribute in that environment. Again, as I said earlier though, Amy, if you're in an environment and you're feeling like you're not being welcomed, you're not being appreciated, then that's why we make a plan and we move on.
Right. Leslie, I know you do a lot of counseling and therapy with people. How do you get people to really kind of dig in and think about who they are, who their authentic selves are?
Wow.
That's probably a 10-year answer, but
Yeah, pretty much.
where do you start?
Well, I think when we're talking about older women, that's a place that I really speak to them about, what, as Ashton's been speaking, what is it inside of them? How do they find that piece of them that they can develop and use in their lives? I love Ashton's line, and I quote it all the time, about anti-aging is about anti-living. And I use it with my clients, when they're looking to do, and I work a lot with, as I said, body image and eating disorders, when they're doing Botox, when they're changing their bodies physically, when they have fantasies of plastic surgery. Let's get back to who you really are underneath all of what you're trying to change. And what difference is that really going to make if you don't have lines on your forehead? It's about who you are at whatever age. And I do think we also kind of need to come, as Ashton was saying, out about our age, that we have to own who we are. I mean, you let your hair grow the natural color. It saves you a lot of money. That's who we are. So I really do try to work on authenticity to get away from all of the images of what women are supposed to look like. It's wonderful that there are older models, but there's still, some kind of an ideal. And I also think that as much as we try to get, show ourselves and get back into the workplace, the problem is as you get older, as I experienced, you don't even get a chance to get in there and talk to people. We really need to change what's going on in the workplace, in the workforce. That's another revolution.
Yeah, there was a very interesting question that just came through the chat that said, I'm having trouble, a person said they were having trouble with phone interviews. And that's even before the visual, feedback. So do you have any tips for people in those upfront, conversations that they might be having in interviews?
Ashton, was there something you wanted to say?
Oh, no, I was just going to point out that in the corporate setting, I think it's really helpful to use that age as a criterion for diversity and inclusion. All companies know they should be on it. I think it's only, and some high 90% of companies, you probably know better, have D&I training. Only 3% or 4% include age. So point that out. It's not legal. Also, it's not legal. That didn't speak to. I also see a lot of comments about generational thinking, and I want to point out, of course, it's always a mistake to group people by generation, because how could anything be true of a whole generation? A lot of things we think of as generational effects were true, our age effects, not generational effects. For example, the ageist stereotype that millennials change jobs all the time and aren't dependable. When we were their age, so did we.
In terms of phone interviews, I think you just prepare as best you can. You try to show that you do know new technology, you know what's going on in the workplace. I know even the 2 years I was out, now you don't have offices anymore. They're open workspaces. I mean, I think women need to do some research just on what does the new workforce look like before they get on a phone interview, let alone any.
Good. I want to get back to this issue to Diane, because she's actually served as a Chief Diversity Officer. Are we beginning to see ageism in that conversation? What have you experienced?
I think it depends on the company that you work in.
Yeah.
So, and that's part of what I was saying about culture, because one of the things that attracted me to going to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York is that, you know, there you find people who are respected, who have been in the field for 20, 30 years. It is a land of economists. That's absolutely true. But, you know, I think that they're embraced. And so I think that, you know, you have to kind of understand when you're looking into your career path, and you have to go somewhere where you feel that you're going to be accepted and people are going to appreciate the experience that you bring to the table. So I would say certainly from a standpoint of ageism, we looked at that aligned with all of our diversity dimensions, right?
Yeah.
In fact, one of the things we had, we formed 10 employee resource networks during the course of the 12 years I was there, and one of them was named Generations. And the point of it was to bring together the 4 generations that are in the workforce. And they actually worked on projects together. They discovered a lot. You know, there's a lot of work that's starting to demonstrate that the boomers have more in common with millennials sometimes than they have with the Xers, kind of interestingly enough. So I think really when you start to engender and encourage the conversation, I think that's when people start to realize, you know what, we have more in common than dissimilar. So I would certainly say that that is something that I think, you know, we need to continue to encourage.
Yeah. An interesting question came in about a woman who's interested in the intersectionality of being female and over 50. She's working in an environment with female leaders who focus on the few and favorite women, the next generation. How do you combat that kind of subtle bias?
Are you asking that to Leslie or Ashton?
Go ahead, go ahead.
Call it out.
I wouldn't call it such subtle bias. It sounds pretty
How do
overt.
we combat that overt bias?
I mean, we can use the things we've learned. You know, there's a lot more light being shed now on men saying the same thing a woman said 5 minutes earlier and getting all the credit for it. You know, we can use those tools to age bias, substitute age for gender. It's another good litmus test for whether a comment, you know, is okay or not. If it wouldn't get a pass on the basis of race or gender, and it's made on the basis of age, that's not okay either. And if we can call it out in a neutral way, not to shame anybody or put them on the defensive because then they just shut down, that is how we change the culture. Gee, you know, I've noticed this pattern. What do you think?
And I think you're absolutely right, Ashton. I agree with you 100% because I think you're right. There is a need to build a relationship first because that will help to set the stage so when the difficult conversation comes where you're talking about calling someone out for bad behavior, I think that helps to establish that. The other thing I think that we haven't really kind of hit on is the notion of accountability, because these organizations really should be held to task. The senior executives from the very top down have to exemplify, have to model support for all employees, be it diverse, but certainly from the standpoint of building inclusion, which is allowing everyone to have an opportunity to be who they want to be, to have the potential to be who they want to be, and to give them the opportunities to be able to do what they need to do. So I would certainly say that, yes, build the relationships. Don't be afraid. And we're talking about being authentic. Being authentic, parts of that is calling out the question that, you know, is this really what you mean? Because I think that's one way that we start to kind of ease some of the issues and the assumptions that are made in the workplace.
Excellent. I always loved Pat Waters, who used to be the Chief Diversity Officer at LinkedIn, and she talked about diversity, inclusion, and belonging.
Right.
So the elements of relationship are really critical.
Correct.
As it relates to ageism. Another interesting question came in from someone who spent 30 years in academia that demanded 60-hour work weeks, and I think we've all been there, whether may not be in academia. And that this is the only way I know how to be successful. Now that I'm in my 60s, my body is telling me that this pace is unsustainable in the long run. How do I recalibrate my notions of what a successful career as a leader in my field looks like as I confront the physical demands of aging, especially when ageism correlates youthful vitality with physical energy and success? Ashton, do you want to take that one on?
I have a big picture answer to that, which is to question that binary of success and failure, right? Of mobility and immobility, of dependence and independence. I would like to snatch the word independence out of the whole aging discourse. We're interdependent from the minute we're born. Yes, we do need more help with physical tasks as we get older. When we acknowledge that, we destigmatize it, right? And there is no shame in it. I don't like this successful aging discourse, because we don't fail at childhood. We don't fail at middle age. Why should age be something we fail at? Why should aging successfully be struggling to look and move like younger versions of ourselves via remedies, which once again are only available to the wealthy, right? So it's a really huge ask. Again, it's the task of a lifetime, but try to let go of the idea that there is a certain standard, which frankly was built once again by wealthy white men of success and opinion, and skinny white women, all young, of course, to what the ideal is, and let go of the idea that that is an ideal at any age, let alone one to which we should continue to aspire as we learn more and know more.
So when you take a step back and say, what does the future really hold for boomers and retired people? What would you say are you seeing people moving into this more aggressive mode and taking on? Yes.
I'm seeing people get more aware of ageism, which I think is incredibly exciting. I mean, it's not all ageism. The roles and institutions around us were created when lives were shorter, and they haven't had time to catch up. And that gives us an incredible opportunity to see longer lives, not just as a challenge, which they are. I'm no Pollyanna about this, but also as the unique opportunity, unprecedented opportunity, to tap in to the social capital of millions and millions more healthy, well-educated adults, most of them women, than ever before in human history. And, so this does give us an amazing opportunity. We're going to respond very differently, and we're not going to address those enormous global challenges that I referenced at the very beginning unless we do so at all ages. So I know we're closing up. I will leave you with a big thought, that the women's movement taught us to claim our power, and a pro-aging movement, anti-ageism movement, call it either one, is going to teach us to hold on to it. Women are going to lead this movement. Let's make it happen.
Excellent. Very, very good. I think that's a wonderful closing thought there. And that there was another comment that just came in that said, I would question that anyone should be working 60-hour work weeks. So
they're not working in investment banking.
Thank you for Michelle for sending that over. We are just about out of time, and just wanted to note that we will be sending out reporting to people. We will also be sending out follow-up information, perhaps some resources that might be useful for you. I really wanted to thank Ashton and Leslie and Diane for sharing your stories and the various ways that you've all had for addressing this issue of ageism, and are continuing to drive purposeful lives and careers, and just the energy and aspirational dreaming that I've heard today is, I think, been phenomenal. And I'm really left with the sense that in terms of work and impact, the best is yet to come. So thank you also for those behind the scenes, Jen DeVore and Ursula Burns, who will be closing this, our programming co-chairs, and other members of the Yale Women Governing Council, the Yale IT team, person,
our gentleman,
and the alumni office. And thanks to all of you, nearly 400 strong on the call today. And we'll be including other information so that you'll have follow-up information and contact information. And we certainly hope you'll get involved or more involved in your local Yale community chapter, your local Yale club, your graduate chapter, and alumni association, any alumni association that's meaningful to you. So finally, I'm going to pass this back off to Ursula for a close and a thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy, and Ashton, Diane, and Leslie. As Amy said, we've recorded the webinar. We will be posting it at yalewomen.org. And there you can also find more information about today's guests, additional information that they had mentioned. We could send links about that. Also about chapters and events in your area. And there are previous webinar links there, including gendered language and blocking bias in the workplace, sex and gender equity in health research, salary negotiation, confidence when it counts, and women in politics. Yale Women is an all-volunteer 501c3 organization. We don't charge dues or membership fees, and we're able to host webinars like this thanks to the generosity of our members. Please consider supporting more programming like this by making a donation to Yale Women. For today's webinar, I'm going to repeat a little bit of what Amy said, but I need to send thanks out to my incredible co-chair of the Yale Women Programming Committee, Jennifer DeVore, as well as the entire Yale Women Council, our communications team, our chapter heads, and the support team at Yale. And thank you so much for joining us. Connect women, ignite ideas, transform the world, and remember to celebrate your age.
Thank you.